behalf of Karachi Council of Foreign Relations, I welcome you all to this webinar, which is being addressed by two prominent personalities. First one is Dr. Rashid Amjad, and followed by that will be Honorable Finance Minister Dr. Abdul Hafeez Sheikh. But before that, I'm going to request our chairman, Mr. Ikram Sehgal, to give a welcome address. Now, Mr. Sehgal is heading a company, two companies, security companies, with 15,000 employees in over 50 cities and towns in Pakistan, and is under the umbrella of Pathfinder Group.
Thank you, Moin Fudda Saab. First of all, let me welcome all the participants, particularly Dr. Abdul Hafeez Sheikh, because as we all know, that must be the most pressing engagement today, because he's not only fighting the economic battle, but he's also fighting the battle created by COVID-19. And therefore, as it is, Pakistan is not an easy country to deal with the economy. He has been fighting a number of multiple battles on many fronts. And one of them has been having done very realistic reforms, which 2 years ago, a lot of us scoffed at. And actually, when the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf government came in, but once Mr. Hafeez Sheikh had taken over, and with his being a consummate technocrat with tremendous experience in national or financial organizations across the board in worldwide, he brought in, and having a lot of experience within Pakistan. So he basically, he has really done a lot of good, and that good is now coming to light in the form of how we have managed to confront the COVID-19 pandemic, and not only, let us say, escaped, quite unscathed to an extent. And I'm not going to into statistics of how the debt, how much debt we had, how we managed to pay off some of them, how we are still managing to pay off. That is, Mr. Hafeez Sheikh will tell you. I just want to thank him personally, because the moment I asked him, he readily accepted to be a part of the webinar.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Chairman KCFR has already done the introduction of Honorable Chief Guest, but allow me to say that he has been the Finance Minister and a planning of the government of Sindh from 2000 to 2002, and his best era that Pakistan had seen was from 2003 to 6, when he led the most successful privatization program for the people of Pakistan in the history of the country, with $5 billion worth of privatization of 34 entities, and about 1 million workers of those organizations became the shareholder. Today, I'm sure Dr. Hafeez is going to touch on a number of topics, and the recovery that we have seen in the month of July post-COVID, and the stock market. But today, if the stock market has witnessed 40% surge, then many of the scripts which were privatized and which were listed at the stock market were in his own era. And I was very pleased to be part of his team. So I know that how he worked very hard in attracting the foreign investors at that time, and also getting those entities listed. So Dr. Hafeez Sheikh, people are keen to listen to you, particularly the board members of the Karachi Council of Foreign Relations. And thank you very much again for agreeing to speak. And I now request you to enlighten us with your views. Thank you.
Let me start first of all by thanking the organizers for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. I want to acknowledge Ikram Sehgal Sahab for his contributions towards business and public service in Pakistan, both here and in his capacity as a senior member of the Davos community. I want to start, first of all, by saying that जब ये government आई, so there was a particular situation that was inherited, जो हमें विरसे में मिली. And there were some really bad signs in the economy, which was verging upon a crisis. So दो तीन चीजें जो I would like to share with you is that we had basically deficits of historic magnitude, both on the external front as well as the domestic front. And the historic failure of Pakistan in not being able to integrate with the world economy was on full display. Because in the past 5 years or even 10 years, the country had failed to generate export growth. Or jo 5 saal guzre the just before this government came in, the growth rate of exports was 0%, in fact, was negative. And at the same time, a policy, a bizarre policy of trying to keep the dollar cheap was followed. And a lot of money was spent, a lot of foreign exchange was spent to try and preserve dollar at a cheaper level, which had a consequence both of depleting the foreign exchange reserves and at the same time allowing the import-export gap to become historically high, almost approaching $40 billion. And the current account deficit was also at its highest level at $20 billion.
Dr. Rashid Amjad is a professor of economics and a director, Graduate Institute of Development Studies and Center for International Migration.
In the current situation of COVID-19, which has threatened the world economies and is still not under control in many countries, the task of maintaining or achieving macroeconomic stability is perhaps the most difficult one that any country or any government has found itself. I would go and say till as perhaps the Great Depression of the late 30s. As you know, macroeconomic stabilization or macroeconomic stability is a prerequisite for entering a stage of high, sustained, and equitable growth. Pakistan was, during 1960 to 1990, amongst the 10 fastest growing economies in the world, according to the World Bank data and statistics. Unfortunately, over the last 30 years, we have neither had growth, nor have we been able to achieve macroeconomic stability, and nor have we been able to get onto a path of sustained economic growth.
The first task really was how to avoid a complete meltdown, how to avoid a potential default, and how to retrieve the situation. So a lot of important and bold decisions were taken. The first, was to galvanize support from the international community for our reform program. And for that, we were able to get the support of the IMF, which is the premier financial institution in the world. And once we got our agreement with them, we were able also to secure additional financing and for budgetary support from the IMF, following the IMF from the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank, and of course, from bilateral sources. So that was the first, effort in which we succeeded to avert a crisis. At the same time, we had to take some tough decisions, which was to let the dollar find its value as the markets may determine, because we neither had the dollars to blow on this failed policy, nor did it make sense to try and discourage exports with the overvalued rupee. So we shifted the policy focus because historically Pakistan in 72 years, one of its historic failures has been the inability to generate exports in a fundamental way. So we shifted the focus away from a free flow of all sorts of imports towards a policy of exports. And in that, we gave the business community a lot of incentives. We gave them subsidies on loans, subsidies on electricity, subsidies on gas, no taxes of any sort, and a refund regime so that they could go out and explore markets on somewhat, better terms. And because the rupee also had depreciated, it was a more conducive environment for exports. So this was a big step. The other big step we took was to be very aggressive in cutting government expenditures. So, and that was manifested both symbolically and substantively. Symbolically, we cut the salaries of the cabinet members. We cut the salary of other, senior officials. We froze the salaries of the secretaries and the generals. And at the same time, we tried to cut other government expenditures. The President House, the Prime Minister House, but at a more substantive level, we froze the military expenditures budget. We cut the entire civilian government's budget. And we also did not give a single supplementary grant throughout the entire year. So we said no to everybody for any money in addition to what was already budgeted. And that was tough, but it was maintained. And this expenditure management began to have a good result. And pre-corona, the revenue side, the tax side, was moving at a good pace of about 17% per year improvement. So we were headed for about 4.5 trillion, 4.7 trillion revenue collection before the coronavirus struck us. And a very important feature of this time was that we were able to have first time in 20 years, a primary balance, which was a surplus rather than a deficit. And another very serious accomplishment at this time, again, was to pay back interest on borrowed loans. And you can get an idea of how much that burden was, that in the 2 years of this government, we have had to pay 5 trillion, 5,000 billion rupees as interest payment for loans that were borrowed earlier.
Phase in which the growth periods are very short and the stagflation or periods are getting longer and longer. And the result of this for the last 30 years is right there for us to see. Today, economies like Bangladesh has a higher per capita GDP in dollar terms, and also, as I was surprised when I found out yesterday, in purchasing power parity. Similarly, India has, in purchasing power parity, almost double our purchasing poverty per capita income. So we have paid a very heavy price in terms of not being able to get macroeconomic stability.
And because of our policy of trying to cut imports and increase exports, we have been able in the last 2 years to bring our current account deficit from 20 billion to only 3 billion. So, at the same time, we tried to mobilize our non-tax revenues. And the non-tax revenues, I'm happy to share with you, showed extraordinary growth. Over the budgeted figure was about 1.1 trillion, but we were able to achieve about 1.5, 1.6 trillion. So this is a historically high number and shows the resolve of the government to mobilize all avenues. अब आप देखें कि just before the coronavirus struck us, we were getting very good reviews. The IMF board called our program a big success, and we were fulfilling all our performance benchmarks. At the same time, Bloomberg was giving us good reviews and rating our stock market as one of the best in the world. The World Bank came out and listed us as amongst the top 10 performers for reducing the cost of doing business and making it easy to do business. So these were some of the big features of this government.
I don't want to blame governments of the past, but let me say quite honestly that of the last 4 governments, all of them inherited an unenviable situation with unsustainable fiscal current deficit and a very high bill to pay on foreign debts. Indeed, I am reminded of a verse which was said to me by a fellow economist of the IMF, who had actually negotiated 3 of the last 4 IMF agreements with Pakistan, and he was here in 2018, and he spoke to us at the Lahore School of Economics, where I am from, not Lams. He said, ले आए फिर कहाँ पर, किस्मत हमें कहाँ से, ये तो वही जगह है, गुजरे थे हम जहाँ से. So again and again, we end up in the same macroeconomic mess, and every government, including the current one, then has to take action or negotiate with the IMF. Some do it earlier, some do it later. I don't blame any government, and especially the PTI government, for taking longer. At least they took their time to understand the situation better. But in the end, there was no other way out but to go to the IMF and reach an agreement. And I would like to put on record here, as far as I can see, that the economy has begun to show signs, positive signs of stabilizing, whether it's the fiscal deficit or it is the current account deficit, which has gone down by an enormous amount. We can quibble about the package. I mean, there's always a very strict package which the IMF brings along. And the package in this case was even more stricter, because the overhang which the last government left us, God bless them all, and I keep listening to their representatives speaking of such great achievements, $30 billion financing gap left behind for the new government to pay off, with hardly any foreign exchange reserves of 10 billion. I'm sure the finance minister will be able to go into this in much greater detail. Now, my only thing about the stabilization package agreed upon is the exchange rate mechanism. I am not a great supporter of, and I do not, this is a point which can be debated. I do not believe that a developing country, or many, very few developing countries, go in for a situation where you have a market-determined exchange rate. And I do believe that the government devalued more than was needed, given the purchasing power parity at that moment was about 140. We went down to 157, and now we are at about 168. But credit to the state bank, it has been able to maintain this exchange rate between 160 to 170, and a narrow range of about 7 to 10% over last year. But this situation could become more difficult.
An important way to judge this government is how we responded to the coronavirus situation. I think that Pakistan, with its limited resources, has done a really good job in trying to benefit its business community and its citizens. So हमारा पहला जो goal था वो ये था कि coronavirus में our people should not suffer. And I think the first task was to ensure that our people, whether those who are poor, whether those who are in remote parts of the country, or whether those who have lost their jobs due to the lockdown, they must receive immediate injection of cash into their pockets. Or uske liye a big program of about 1.2 trillion, 1,240 billion, 1,240 billion stimulus package was prepared. And one of the central features of that was to get money into the hands of people who need it. और इसके लिए कोई 1,60,00,000 लोगों को 16 million families were given cash support of 12,000 rupees each, which means if every family is, consisting of roughly 6 people, then about 100 million plus or 10 crore लोगों को ये मदद दी गई. And I think that helped them sustain through this period. Moin Saab, if you think advisable, maybe you can list a few questions so that then I can try to react to them in one go.
Okay, sir, I will do that. So, one of the other member of the Board of Governors is asking about the interest rates that government was a bit slow in bringing those down. But then there is another thought that the pensioners are suffering because the rates has gone down and their standard of living is not up to mark. There is also a question about the employment, and you recently presented a report to the Prime Minister about Kamyab Jawan program, and you may like to throw light on that also. Then there are a couple of other questions which I will come back if you like. There is a student from LUMS is asking a very important question here about the impact of low foreign exchange reserves on inflation and devaluation in 2021. There's a question about Karachi, which is the hub, and without addressing the issues of Karachi, how can stability be brought? But then again, this is something which has been also discussed recently or last night about forming a committee.
We have not done a good job of reducing its footprint in the economy. As you know, some of the banks, some of the refineries, some of the electricity companies, and a lot of the manufacturing units and telecom were privatized during the period of 2003 to 2006. But sadly, since 2006, not a single entity has been privatized. And I think we are beginning to try and remedy that, because that failure has proven very costly for Pakistan. And you know that we have huge burdens that we are shouldering because of the employment and pension liabilities that have accrued because of the losses that have been generated even in PIA and steel mill and railways and so on. So, and of course the related question of the electricity sector. Now I can tell you that the electricity sector is receiving a lot of attention, but the problems have been around for a long time. They have to do with bad contracts from the past, but it doesn't kind of pay for me to just keep dumping upon the past. What we need to do is find a way to refine or improve those contracts. And I think we have made some headway, as you all know, and that's a good thing. The second feature of it is that Some of the technologies are old, especially in some government-owned generation companies and in the distribution network. Upgrading them requires money, which may not be easy always. But I think a lot of effort is going now to try and improve the distribution network. And the distribution companies have to collect their bills better. And there is a proposal or there's a thinking that perhaps the entire distribution companies can be managed better by private sector management, or at least their bill collection can be subcontracted out so that some of the corruption and some of the leakages can be minimized that way. I think on the interest rates, look, this is, as you rightly say, a dual-edged stuff. I try not to talk too much about the interest rates and the exchange rate because they are more so in the domain of the state bank. But generally speaking, if the interest rates are high, then the borrowers have a problem. But if the interest rates are too low, then the savers have a problem. And a lot of people, especially those who are retired and get money in pensions and so on, they suffer when the interest rates are too low. The important thing is that we have to strike a good balance between the needs and aspirations of the borrowers and the requirements of the savers, and also where the state of the economy is at that moment.
I'm going to take a few questions. It's now 6 a.m. in Houston, and our member Air Marshal Rashid Sheikh is asking me about the foreign remittance, and there is also Imran Surya from Dubai asking me that how come with the COVID situation, when the Pakistanis are suffering also, remittance is high. One view is that a lot of people have come back for good, and is the final paycheck that they've got brought the remittance up. Is it going to continue?
Good question that why they are high. We feel that it might be a combination of reasons. One is that people are sending more money to their families because these are difficult times. The second is that, yes, some of them may have lost their jobs and are making one-off transfers. A third is that we feel we have given a Pakistan remittance initiative in which we have reduced the cost of remitting money through banks and so on. So it could be a combination of things. We have to keep we do not have to declare any victory prematurely. I think we have to monitor the situation and see whether this trend continues or not. And only then we will be able to say with confidence about what the reason may be. As far as the 18th Amendment is concerned, that's a law of the land, and I think the Parliament makes these laws, and the idea is to give more autonomy and more mandate to the provincial governments. Because let's recognize that a lot of things that truly matter to the public, whether it's basic education, basic health, municipal services, the issues related to mother and children, smaller courts, police, a lot of these things have to do with the provincial government. And I think if they have more resources, it's okay, provided they are used in a correct way. At the same time, because previously the sharing formula was in the nature of 50-50, and now it's 57.5 in the favor of the provinces. And the federal government also has to pay for Gilgit-Baltistan and Azad Jammu and Kashmir. It does, create a macroeconomic situation for the federal government. And, in a country like Pakistan, where people have opinions and views, that's the beauty of our democracy. And I think we should seriously take everyone's view into account. Ultimately, legislation is the responsibility of the parliament.
I'd like to ask Ikram Saab to formally close this and to thank you again.
Thank you, Moin, and thank you, Finance Minister. First of all, I must thank Dr. Rashid Amjad. We have been friends for the last 68 years, and he has always been a great colleague, and as we've seen, a very objective analysis. I must thank Moin Saab, a great support for us in the Karachi Council for Foreign Relations. It's been a pleasure and privilege to be a board member along with him. I have just a few comments, and I think most of it the Finance Minister has covered. And one of them is, yes, really we need to unshackle the economy. Really unshackle the economy, and like you did when you were the privatization minister, we must hasten up the privatization. That is a central thing. Number two is, we're dealing with a lot of things in Karachi, 6 subjects that have been done with the committee. One thing which is not there, of course, out of intention, is Karachi Electric. And I think something must be done about it. You cannot actually keep on going this thing. And one major thing is to really, do some drastic thing so that at least which Karachi Electric being a national security asset must be, because if Karachi works, Pakistan works. And that is very, very vital to Pakistan. Third is that, you have tremendous policy. There's no doubt. The success of it is there. You have sort of itemized some of them, how things have become better despite the COVID and all the things that you have done. But yet, I learned a long time back that policies that are staked out, if they're not implemented, and they really are not implemented, because when it goes to bureaucracy, you have problems. And those problems, the people down the line face. I'm tempted to talk about certain things, but ethics prohibit me from doing so. But the point is that things which are required for the people of Pakistan, for the vast majority of people of Pakistan, which is being held up, these things must not, the Imran Khan, who is motivated by going and saying, emancipating the problems that people of Pakistan are facing, he must be made aware of such things so that the bureaucracy functions as they should. And they should be a facilitator rather than a blockader. So with that, let me congratulate you, and let me congratulate all those who have participated in this webinar. We wish to be, this thing will again, inshallah, come back to you soon. And as you said, we are seeing the silver lining, and we're seeing light at the end of the tunnel finally, and real light, not just a fake light. So we look forward to interacting with you, and thank you again, Hafeez Sheikh Saab, for being with us tonight. Goodbye, Assalamu Alaikum to all participants.